Well, hello out there. It's T.M. Brown. Welcome to our next reading from my very first book, A Life Not My Own. I'm so excited that you guys continue to show up and listen to my readings. My intent is to share more with you than you'd experience if you read my story on your own. If you decide you want to read along with me, you can grab one of my books at www.authortmbrown.com. We started from the very first page of this book, and we're going to work our way through the entire book. We are on page 25 now, in the chapter called Ma. We're about halfway down the page on the paragraph, about 3 paragraphs up from the bottom. So, are you ready? Mac, Sharon, my 5 cousins and I would play outside for hours, no matter what the weather conditions were. In the winter, we'd put on every piece of winter clothes that we owned, socks on our hands in place of mittens, 3 pairs of socks to keep our little toes warm, plus sweaters and coats. We'd play until our little runny noses were uncontrollable and the tips of our little fingers were numb. Then we'd run home to get warm and hope that Ma would let us back outside. She'd make us hot Hershey's chocolate and send us back out to play at some point. One year in Baltimore, we had a blizzard that dumped so much snow on us that the city literally shut down. We were out of school for days, and of course we loved that. As small children, the snow seemed deeper to us, much deeper to us. There were areas where the snowdrifts were taller than we were. Most of the children in our neighborhood did not own real sleds, but that never stood in the way of us finding a way to have fun in the snow. We'd make sleds out of discarded tire inner tubes, or old cardboard boxes. We'd find the biggest hill in the neighborhood and beg Ma to let us play there. It seemed that the really fun places were outside of the boundaries that Ma would allow us to play in. Even so, we would play until we were totally exhausted. The candy store was another one of the places that was outside of the boundaries that Mama would allow us to go to. Actually, it wasn't a store at all. The candy store was in the home of an older woman who sold 1-cent pieces of candy, which we all called penny candy, and she sold this from her front porch. Her house was located down the street from the elementary school in the adjoining neighborhood that we called Old Fairfield. This was an area that was predominantly occupied by black homeowners. The homes ranged in style and condition. Old Fairfield was considered by most of the people in my neighborhood to be a step up from where we lived. This was my first exposure to the idea of home ownership and the pride and status associated with it. Sometimes my classmates would sneak off the school grounds during recess and go to the candy lady's house. We could get a lot of candy for a quarter back then. Long red string licorice, 5 for 1 cent, squirrel nuts, 2 for a penny, jawbreaker, 1 cent each, bubble gum, 1 penny, so on and so on. Of course, I was afraid to sneak away from school. Therefore, I had to place an order with one of the braver students, for a fee, of course. Each afternoon, our 6th grade teacher, Mr. Prentice, would allow us to eat candy. He was considered by the students to be one of the coolest teachers in the school. He was really tall, handsome, and a black man, and all the girls in my class, including myself, secretly had a crush on him. All the girls, that is, with the exception of one girl who was way too mature for her age. She wore tight sweaters to show off her overdeveloped breasts and made sexual comments in class that most of us didn't even understand. Ma and Frank did their best to give us the best childhood that they possibly could. Many of the neighborhood children considered us pretty lucky. We were friendly with our neighbors, but we also maintained a certain distance and enjoyed spending time together as a family. We were frequent visitors of a park called Fort Smallwood. The park was approximately 45 minutes from our home. On outings to the park, we would make a special trip to the supermarket and purchase a small feast. Our purchase would usually consist of chicken, spare rib, hamburgers, hot dogs, potato salad, potato chips, cake, donuts, soda, all kinds of stuff. My aunt and her five kids, my cousins, were always included in on our outings. We would convoy to the park early in the morning, racing one another down the road, residing there until late in the evening. As a child, Fort Smallwood was the best. The park had lots of playgrounds, picnic areas, and a beach that was located at the mouth of the Patapsco River near the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. The park was immaculate and consisted of little picnic areas with an outdoor grill for each site. Many other areas had gazebos that resembled little gingerbread houses. The gazebos were just big enough to furnish one large picnic table with a bench on each side. Ma and Frank liked to arrive early so that we could get a good spot, not too far from the bathrooms and the beach. As soon as we arrived at the park, Max, Sharon, my cousins, and I would take off our shoes and run to the playground. Most of the play areas consist of swings, sliding boards, and seesaws, all located in sandy areas. I loved the way the warm summer sand felt under my feet. I could find a swing with the most sand around it and swing as high as I could. When I became tired, I'd sit on the swing and make designs in the sand. It was like eating at home when we had picnics at the park. Ma never forgot to bring what she needed. Everything was well thought out, and we always had a really good time. The adults would eat and drink, and we children would play until the very last minute before the convoy loaded up for our return home. The neighborhood, after a while, was beginning to change. The maintenance of the community was declining. It was becoming what people call projects. For those of you who don't know what a project is, it's the opposite side of low-rent housing. This is where the drugs, murder, and self-destructive behaviors reside. To me, it seemed that as the community was beginning to decline, so was our life. Betty had started calling us more. She wanted us to live with her again. I was not happy at all about the possibility of this becoming a reality. Ma had always told us that she was just caring for us until Betty was quote-unquote better. The thought of living with Betty again terrified me. "Hey, Tina, how you doing? Are you doing good?" "Yes." "What grade are you in now?" Adults always ask the same old questions. She was my mother. I shouldn't have to tell her what grade I was in. She should know that. I don't know why she's even calling. I didn't want to talk to her. She left us. "I'm in the 6th grade now." "Oh, that's good. Are you getting good grades?" "Yes." Of course I was getting good grades. Always got good grades. "Would you like to live with me again?" "I think I want to stay with Ma and Frank." "Okay, I'll talk to you later then, okay?" "Okay." That was basically the bulk of the conversations that I had with Betty. I was 11 years old, in the 6th grade, almost a teenager, graduating to the junior high school, and no one seemed to understand. Graduating to the 7th grade was a really big deal to me. There would be white children in my class. Segregation had long since passed. Astronauts had landed on the moon because we saw it in class. But in 1971, there were no white children attending the elementary school in my neighborhood. The junior high school was in the white neighborhood. It was literally across the railroad tracks that divided my black neighborhood from the white neighborhood. The only interaction between the two communities usually occurred within a single row of stores, a supermarket, drugstore, and shoe store that we shared. Our 6th grade class received special counseling sessions on how to interact with our quote-unquote future classmates. All of us tried not to think about the new school and to concentrate on graduation day. Ma wasn't the type who placed a lot of emphasis on school ceremonies. Selecting an outfit for a special occasion such as graduation was always difficult to do with her. Her goal was to ensure that I was clean and presentable. My goal was to look especially nice. The difference in our goals would often lead to conflicts between the two of us. Ma would never stand for me being rude to her, so I had to be very careful about how I approached an issue. Most of the time, I expressed to her my feelings through tears. Sometimes she understood, sometimes she didn't. Frank would usually intervene, promising to speak to Ma. It was my 6th grade graduation day. Frank had spoken to Ma, and I wore the latest fashions. I had on this little white Sizzler dress, white stockings, and a pair of white shoes that I hated. There was no compromise concerning the shoes. The dress was very short and had little panty-like shorts underneath of it. Ma had straightened and curled my hair that morning with a hot comb. I thought I looked great. 6th grade hadn't been the easiest for me. I was very shy, and I didn't have many friends. Friends asked too many questions. A friend would want to know why I lived with my grandmother and not my mother. A friend would want to know where my father was. These were questions that I couldn't and did not want to answer. The children teased me about living with my grandmother and said Ma was too strict. At the time, I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but I was sure that they were not paying me a compliment, and it hurt. But graduation day was different. I was dressed just as nice as all the other children, and some even told me so. Our commencement ceremony was about to begin. My 6th grade class was lined up outside the auditorium ready to walk down the aisle. We had practiced very hard for weeks on the program that we would present to our families. Our theme song was Lean on Me. The hot auditorium was packed with people fanning themselves, waiting to catch a glimpse of their children. I was looking out into the audience, searching for Ma. I didn't expect Frank to be there because he didn't attend school events. I couldn't believe it. There she was, sitting right next to Ma. I couldn't remember her ever attending any of my school events before this time. Betty was at my graduation ceremony. She smiled and waved to me. My classmates asked who she was, and for the first time I could say, "That's my mother." It was great. When graduation ceremonies were over, Ma and Betty were waiting for me in front of the school. I was so excited I forgot all about those ugly shoes that I was wearing. My next memories are of a party. Betty and Ma had arranged for me to have a graduation party at Ma's house. Ma very seldom threw parties for us, so this was a really big deal. All my classmates were there. There was lots of food, and we danced and we danced and we danced. It was a great day. After the graduation, Betty began making unannounced visits to see us. Discussions were taking place still on the possibility of her resuming parental responsibilities for us. She was trying to get her life back on track and had enrolled in a drug treatment program. My position concerning living with Betty had not changed. A party was not going to change that. In some cases, Ma and I did not understand one another, but I loved her and I wanted to stay where I was. There was definitely a generation gap between us, 2 to be exact. The older that I became, the more difficult it was to express my feelings to Ma in a manner that she could understand would not take offense to. She tried to reach out to me, but there were issues that I faced as a preteen that Ma did not understand. There were even more issues that I was never able to verbalize about what it was like to live with Betty. Ma placed a lot of importance on her ability to understand the unexplainable. To say that she was superstitious would have been an understatement. At a young age, she would tell me stories about things that happened in her life that required her to look beyond this world to find meaning. She told me stories about speaking to the dead in dreams. She taught me how to interpret my dreams. She would tell me that when we remember the events of our dream, it was a warning or a sign of things to come. Tina, he said. I said I was half asleep. Do you know who I am? He said. Yes, I know who you are. Will you come with me? No, and I want you to leave me alone. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Ma taught me how to handle this situation. She told me stories about how the dead visit those who are still living in their dreams because it is easier to reach us that way. She told me that I should not be afraid of the visits and to listen for the message in the dream. She also warned me of the devil who would try to trick children to be with him. Frank would always laugh when Ma told her stories, but I knew there was some truth in what she said. I knew exactly who he was. I never told Ma about this particular dream. Thinking of it scared me so bad that I was afraid to go to sleep at night. I was not sure what it meant to go with him, but I was very sure it was not a good thing. As a child, the good times seemed so short-lived. When I look back on my childhood with Ma and Frank, I can remember many good times. Ma grew up in a small town called Brown Store, Virginia, in the southern portion of Northumberland County. Northumberland County is located in the northern portion of the state. It is also a peninsula bounded by the Rappahannock and Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. The residents of Brown Store seemed to be stuck in a world that had long since passed. To me, it was like visiting a time similar to those that I had learned about in school, a time when blacks were just becoming a part of society but accepted only as second-class citizens. Even Ma was different when we visited our family members in Virginia. She would hesitate before opening doors at stores, hold us by the hand, and she always used sir and ma'am when she spoke to whites. It was really weird. Mac, Sharon, and I, we were city kids. Therefore, everything about going to Virginia was exciting. The long drive there, the pit stop that we made along the way to purchase the reddish-colored hot dogs, the relatives that we met for the first time, the fresh vegetables that we bought. But most of all, we loved the reception that we received. Everyone was always so happy to see us. They gave us money, begged for us to show them the latest city dance steps, and wanted to know what our lives were like in the big city. I met my real grandfather for the first time on one of our Virginia trips. He was thin, very dark, and looked very old to me. Mama introduced him to Mac, Sharon, and I in the manner that she would introduce us to a stranger. Tina, Mac, and Sharon, this is your grandfather, Gene. Mac's first name was Gene as well, but Ma told us that he wasn't named after my grandfather. Actually, my brother was named after the actor Gene Barry. We all said hello. He asked us the usual adult questions about school, our ages, and offered us some candy. After the introduction, the adults began drinking and partying that would last late into the night. We kept ourselves busy exploring new sights such as cornfields, the well, live chickens, and the outhouse. We were very good at finding ways to keep ourselves amused while the adults partied. Like most children, the fun would come to a halt when one of us, and that was usually Mac, got in trouble. It seemed as though no matter where we went, he would, quote unquote, get in trouble. We really enjoyed our trips to Virginia with the exception of one issue, lodging. Although Ma had relatives who had plenty of room to spare, most of them never offered to have us stay overnight at their homes. I ain't gonna have these kids all the way down here with no place to stay, Ma said. She was a very proud woman. Her strength was something that I didn't always recognize as a child. She would not compromise her feelings on what was right in order to pacify another person, no matter what. She taught us to be responsible for ourselves and to never put ourselves in a position where we would have to, as she would say, take shit off of anybody. Ma and Frank decided to rent a summer place. Our so-called summer place was actually a converted gasoline station consisting of 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, living room, and an outhouse. We scrounged together whatever furniture we could find and gathered linen, pots and pans, and other items from our house in Baltimore. The heat source for the entire house was an old wood stove located in the living room. It was very rustic, to say the least. Mac, Sharon, and I thought it was the coolest place when we were kids. We loved going there. I remember the first time we stayed there. We were all very excited about our home away from home. Sharon and I were given the bedroom that adjoined to the kitchen. Mac's bedroom was closer to the living room where Ma and Frank slept. Because that's just how they were. They would always make sure that we were okay first. And whatever was left, that was what they would have. Ma spent most of our first day at the summer place cleaning the outhouse. She seemed to know exactly what was needed to bring the house up to her level of cleanliness. She disappeared inside the outhouse with her cleaning supplies and old rags for what seemed to be forever. When she finished, it was as clean as our bathroom at home. It did not smell, and there wasn't a speck of dirt anywhere. Ma's face gleamed with pride at the work she had done to clean the outhouse. I felt it was her way of giving us a glimpse into her past and the manner in which she had grown up. After dinner, we washed ourselves in the kitchen in a large aluminum tub while Ma heated and poured more hot water into the tub to keep the water warm. Sharon and I were still young enough at the time to take a bath together, and we thought it was fun. After our baths, we put on our PJs and went into the living room to watch TV with Ma and Frank. We hadn't been in the living room very long before a knock came on the door. It was Ma's brother, Joe. We sat there for a while watching TV and laughing with Uncle Joe, who was standing close to the wood stove, when all of a sudden there was a loud boom. Then again, boom. On the third boom, an indentation formed in the cast iron wooden stove. Ma knew exactly what it was. That sounded like a bullet to me, she said. I know damn well, she said as she began to search through her purse. Frank, look at this. Somebody done been in my purse and took the bullets out of the box. The room became very quiet. Then she asked the question, although we already knew what the answer would be, who went in my purse? Nobody answered. I'm going to ask one more time, who went in my... I didn't think they would go off, Max said. You didn't have no business in my purse. You could have killed somebody, boy. Get to your room. Sharon and I sat very quietly. I don't know what's wrong with that boy. He's always doing something, Ma said. He's just being a boy. You know how boys are, Uncle Joe said. Tina and Sharon, y'all go on to bed too. We didn't say a word. We just went to bed. We could hear Ma, Frank, and Uncle Joe in the living room talking. It took us a long time to fall asleep. Ma was talking about the many times Mac had gotten into trouble in the past. Whenever she was upset about something that we did, we'd hear a review of all the things we had done over the last few months. When this review was directed at Mac, it would literally last for days. Usually Frank would say, all right, Mama, that's enough, and Ma would stop fussing. Mayo, Maryland was another place that we used to visit. Frank lived there when he was a kid, and his relatives still live there. Although Frank and Ma talked about the atrocious conditions in which the family lived, we visited quite often. Frank's sister resided in what could be considered little more than a shack. There was no running water or electricity. The house was always filthy and contained far too many people. Ma would give us instructions on how to conduct ourselves during our visit there. We were not allowed in the bedrooms. We could not eat anything without asking Ma first. We could not sit on the bedpan. They didn't have indoor plumbing. Most importantly, we were not allowed to go anywhere without asking Ma first. Like Betty, Ma set the rules without explaining their purpose, and we followed her instructions without question. Sometimes, when Ma and Frank were having a really good time visiting, sitting outside drinking and laughing with Frank's relatives and old childhood friends, Ma would become a little lax in her rules. Once, she allowed us to play in one of my cousin's bedrooms. The room looked as if it were an addition to the dwelling. Well, as a matter of fact, every room in the house appeared to have been added at various times during the life of the house. My cousin's room was horrible. It was dark, smelly, cold, and nothing was arranged in any type of order. We were playing on the bed in the corner of the room. As I stepped off the bed, I felt something cold and wet on my shoe, then on my socks, then all the way up to my calf. I had stepped in the piss pot. It was the most disgusting, embarrassing moment I had experienced in a very long time. My cousin didn't seem to be embarrassed at all. She laughed for what seemed to be forever until one of the children told Ma. Needless to say, the visit was cut short and we were on our way back to Baltimore. We continued to visit Frank's relatives and friends, but the rules were never discarded again. We also visited Frank's friend in a nearby community. Although most of our visits occurred in the late 60s and early 70s, the conditions in which many of the people of Mayo, Maryland lived was characteristic of a much earlier time. The communities were totally occupied by blacks. The homes were little more than shacks connected by dirt or gravel driveways and roads. Most of the homes did not have running water or electricity. There was one store in each community. This store was the grocery and the liquor store. Although the prices were reasonable, most residents of the community could not afford them. It seemed to me that Ma wanted us to recognize how lucky we were to live as we did. She wanted us to know that there were many blacks that lived very hard lives, Ma and Frank always took us along with them on their outings when we were young. They expected us to be on our best behavior. Unfortunately, we were not. There was a childhood friend that Frank liked to visit in Edgewater, Maryland. He had a dog that we would play fetch with for hours while Ma and Frank visited. One day while we were outside playing with the dog, Mac began exploring in the backyard. Frank's friend had a daughter in college who had come home on semester break. She was hanging clothes on the line outside to dry while we were playing outside. During Mac's exploration of the yard, he found an old rowboat that was being repaired. The bottom of the boat had a lot of rust spots that someone was priming. Somehow, Mac sprayed the girl's jeans with the primer. Ma was livid. She spanked Mac's butt right then and there. She paid the girl for the pants and concluded our visit. Once again, we heard a review of Mac's misbehavior for the previous month or so, all the way home. Many people in the Edgewater and Mayo communities were struggling to make a better life for themselves and their children. Some of the women caught rides early in the morning to clean the houses of the affluent in nearby Annapolis, Maryland, while the men worked blue-collar jobs. Others received pensions from the military, and some people received money from social services. Ma would talk badly about the backwards thinking of some of the residents. They lived in shacks but drove the best cars, wore the nicest